How you measure the performance of eMTB can be weighted either towards gravity style riding or technical climbing. Now, both actually require quite different bikes. So what insights did our recent 104 challenge provide us in terms of the uphill technical performance of eMTBs? Now, whilst the 104 was primarily a hill climb challenge, at the same time, we were exploring eMTB systems as a whole and not just the motors. So we're actually opening the conversation up into some of the other variables involved. Well, that, of course, plus beating myself repeatedly against those hideous rocks. With brands such as Shimano and Bosch, there are now far more options of bikes to suit your style on the market. So there's a much better chance to get the style of bike you're looking for. There are simply so many bikes out there now, but remember, a higher or lower end bike with a different specification might have a very different performance, which is one of the weaknesses of bike reviews because they look at just one bike. What things to consider then when buying a bike? The brand, the motor, battery capacity, fuel economy, paintwork, components, especially gears, and geometry. I'd probably say the 104 challenge was just as much about rider skill, line choice, rider weight, and the dark arts of motor software, and just how much you can hurt yourself physically. But let's be very clear, there were significant differences between the bikes/motors that we rode. I fully believe that the Yamaha was aided by good geometry and the Bosch and the TQ potentially held back by weight. But performance is an intriguing question, but one that is very difficult to answer. How do you measure performance then? Is it power? Is it fuel consumption, torque, acceleration, feeling, all typical motor values, or traditional mountain bike ones such as handling, downhill ability, or climbing ability, or even value for money and reliability, or plain and simple fun? As I mentioned, how you measure eMTB performance can be weighted towards gravity riding or technical climbing. In many ways, as I said, these require very different bikes. Now, clearly, a better person on a lesser bike might well have beaten a lesser person on a better bike. But nevertheless, we should not lose sight that it's not just about the motors, and that fun can be had on an eMTB for different reasons. Nevertheless, we do have a set of results, and the interesting thing is that the results are pretty much in line with what happens on a smooth but steep climb. So what have we learned about the motors and the systems and software that support them? Well, one thing we've learned for sure is that you guys care. There's no doubt about that. So let's begin then with all things motor, beginning with a feature which many of you think is top of the list, and that is power. There's a great comment in here from Martin Long who says there's simply too many variables: bike suspension, geometry, gearing, tires, course conditions, and rider ability. A technical hill like this does not lend itself to this sort of motor performance test. It doesn't prove what they are aiming for, which is a conclusive test of the motor. Martin, I think I might need to pop down the road for a second. He's out. Now, the question is, how much does power affect the results? And I was hoping that Ray would help me answer that question. Unfortunately, he's out. But having said that, I noticed something in his workshop. Now, I was really hoping that Ray would help me answer the question of how much power an e-mountain bike really kicks out, because let's face it, we don't actually know the answer to that question. We know some general figures, such as most mid-drives kick out between 500 and 700 watts, but to get the real details, then you need to have one of these puppies, a rolling road, such as this, what Ray's made here. It is absolutely mind-blowing. This is going to enable us to get the real facts on how much power gets put down onto the back wheel. Having said that, power isn't actually everything on an e-mountain bike. Is there a correlation between torque and climbing speed? Nope, well, there might be, but not on these bikes on this hill. I'll give you 4 ideas why that might be. 3 bikes, all with around about the same torque but different speeds. The EP8 at 85 Nm might not be as quick due to the software, whilst the Bosch might not be as fast as the Levo because of the slightly heavier bike we rode. And then, as I mentioned, the Yamaha might be quick because of the chainstay length. So software, weight and geometry all play a part. So we've seen in 2020 that Bosch powered riders dominated the power stage. And on this stage as well, we saw that the Bosch was pretty close, but how much did bike weight and geometry factor in? Now, I've got some more great comments here from you guys. First of all, from Fargas, who says, good test and exercise. Pira B, your legs are the fastest motor. Doug McDougall, the skill of the rider has the biggest impact. And also, is this tech climb as much about the bicycle as it is about the motor? And that's from John J. Fab. Yes, John, that's a really good point there. And the fact is that this was one bike, one condition and one rider. Ultimately, we'd love to have had the same motor and the same bike. But that's simply not possible. And in many ways, motors such as the Yamaha are available on a very narrow range of bikes. Another comment here from Crush 1221. Am I crazy? Shouldn't you be testing on flat or steady incline for speed and power? Tech climb performance is probably as much affected by seat angle and chainstay length. Yeah, good point. But what about software? Did the ride character affect the results on this hill? Yes, it did for sure. Now, ride character is actually affected by the motor software, and that varies massively from motor to motor. Now, one of the biggest differences that we found was actually in the startup and the overrun. The speed at which your motor delivers power varies greatly, and it will affect your control in such circumstances as starting on a hill climb or slippery ground. It simply cannot be too fierce, or you'll simply spin. Overrun varies hugely between motors. The Levo and the Bosch provide excellent overrun, which means you can maintain control even on the trickiest climbs, and therefore get away with mistakes and maintain momentum. The EP8, on the other hand, backs off quickly, so you really need to be tuned into the cadence and keep it bubbling. The bottom line, I suppose, is you, the rider, needs to understand this intimately from brand to brand. Now, I'm going to move into a few more comments from you guys before we move into the whole subject of time and does time matter. John Rees says, great job, thanks a million. Andrew Downey, great content, well done, thanks folks. It's a stinker, it is a stinker for sure, Mr. Rick. Maybe it's more to do with the geometry, says Daz BG Full. Steve is great on bikes, but not KOM material because of weight, says Speed Sweet 67. Yeah, well, there's no doubt about that for sure. I love this test. He does it 5 times. So yes, we did do the hill many times to get a consistent result going. And finally, would like to see if an eMTB could get up this climb. I tell you what, it would be pretty tough, that's for sure. So time, does it matter? Well, probably not. I know it sounds stupid to say after all the effort that we went into doing this hill climb, but many would argue that the challenge of getting a lesser powered bike up the hill climb is equally as fun. And let's face it, we can get wrapped up in time when actually it only really matters for the pros. Well, not quite. If you are heavier and like super tech, then the torque is important. Lower power eMTBs such as the Levo SL and the Albert Rise simply are not as capable in those conditions. But we saw some really big differences, and time really does matter to some people. It's a performance advantage which, well, some people think is of value. Personally, I was empowered by all the motors on a hill which I'd never previously been able to conquer on an eMTB. So in my eyes, there simply were no losers. So what about noise? Did noise affect the results? Well, yes, possibly, but only in a subliminal way. I mean, bikes such as the EP8 was definitely the quietest going up the climb, whereas motors such as the Bosch, the Bros, the Yamaha and the TQ all had a distinctive whine to them. And what about going down? Well, it's well known that the Bosch and the EP8 both have a rattle, but does that detract away from the ride? I don't think it does. It's funny, actually, some people say that if they're spending £3,000 on a bike, they expect noise. But adjustability is a big one. Now, both the Specialized and the Shimano EP8 are fully adjustable. Now, what we mean here is that on the Specialized Mission Control app, for example, you can tune in many things such as the peak power and support. Now, this is important because often you will want to have milder or stronger power characteristics depending on the terrain. This is great for tuning in fuel consumption or simply just to tinker, which is a great thing. On the Shimano system, you can have custom presets, and on Bosch and Yamaha have automatic modes, which are really excellent features. And of course, the eMTB mode on Bosch, which is great where the trail changes consistently. The TQ, on the other hand, offers an extremely detailed display, which shows such things as your output and the motor output. Did integration affect the results on this hill? Nope, it didn't. Like I said, it was simply head down, full power mode. However, having said that, the controls and the displays might affect your performance on different hills where you're going up and down the modes. So yes, displays and integration matter, but not quite as much as you'd think. Now, did weight affect the results on this hill? Yes, I think it did, particularly on the Bosch motor, which is on the high bike weighing in at around 26 kilos. At the same time, you certainly have to look at the TQ motor, which is 3.9 kilos alone. So that's definitely going to have an effect. A big difference in weight, but let's not get too carried away here. Yes, there's 600 grams between the Yamaha and the EP8. That's not really going to make much of a difference in performance. But the TQ at 3.9 kilos, yes, possibly. And when you compare that to, say, a Levo SL motor at 1.95 kilograms, it's half the weight. Weight on the bike, however, now that's a big deal for climbing. Not so much for downhill, but for lighter, shallower downhill, yes, quite possibly. We'd like to see how fast a TQ would be in a lighter chassis. You can see the flex already. Significant chain wear too. Remember, the weight of the battery is important, and where that weight is distributed is important as well. And one final thing is, of course, reliability. I know this matters to all of us massively. In fact, we've actually broken most of the e-bike motors on EMBN, all except that is, I think, the Levo SL. Certainly we know the Levo's had its problems, but it seems those have been cured. And let's face it, a lot of these brands do actually have a really good backup service. But that's it, folks. It's time to shut down on our 104 motor feature, for now at least. We will be back though, so in the meantime, let's know what you think are the factors that contribute to eMTB performance.